what's stopping them from actually like backdooring somebody who's using a local LLM and then still siphoning off that information into their data centers and collecting your data anyways?
When you type in your prompt, nothing leaves your machine. Just put your device in airplane mode or just disconnect from the internet, and there you go.
90% of people could do this and basically have the same experience as if they're paying $20 a month for Claude or for ChatGPT and have the same results.
There's no internet round trip, there's no API keys, and most importantly, for some types of functionality, there's no billing based on tokens.
Obviously, you have all these big companies now trying to build these super apps to lock you in. And it really seems, especially after seeing this demo, that lock-in might be gone soon. But we're going to be talking about local models today, local LLMs, and get Andrea's kind of experience with it and his take on it. And he's going to have a few really nice demos as well.
So yeah, as you said, today I'd like to walk through something that I think has become genuinely useful in the last few months in a way that it wasn't just a few months ago. It's the idea of running a large language model on your own laptop device, which also includes your phone. It needs to be a fairly recent one, but I've had great success of doing that on my phone. So yeah, we'll go through what a local large language model is. Then we'll talk a little bit about how it compares to the larger large language models, Claude, ChatGPT, and I'll run a demo using Perplexity to give you an example. And then I'll also show you what running a local large language model looks like if you're writing code and you want, for example, to process some information that you've downloaded from the internet directly on your device.
Awesome. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what you got in store for us. Luckily, we have all the demos will be working. Won't get into what happened in the preview room, but we're here and everything is good and it's all working and we're on Google Chrome. So, Andrea, what is a local LLM for those of you, for the audience that doesn't know?
Yeah, very broadly speaking, a large language model, regardless of where it is, it's a very large mathematical function. So after training, which is what all these big companies are spending billions and billions on, what you have is essentially a big file of numbers called the weights and some code that knows how to run them. Obviously, it's not quite as simple as that, but this is a fairly accessible definition of what we're looking at. And a local large language model is one where the file, so that data, that information lives on your own computer and the model, the calculations run on your own hardware. So when you type in your prompt, nothing leaves your machine. So you can still have access to a chat like function like you'd have with ChatGPT, but there's no internet round trip, there's no API keys. And most importantly, for some types of functionality, there's no billing based on tokens. So if you use API to do anything more sophisticated, that's where you spend your money. The constraint of this approach is obviously your hardware. So you running the thing on your computer. So this is especially how much RAM you've got on your device, whether you've got a decent GPU, which I don't, and how big a model you can realistically load. First of all, downloading the model itself. So how much space have you got to devote to it? And then is it going to run on your machine? And on a modern laptop, you can run models in the 4 to 12 billion parameter range. And the larger open models are still out of reach without any serious kit or are otherwise painfully slow. So to give you an idea, I'll show you this demo on a MacBook Air. It's a MacBook Air from last year with an M4 chip and the 16 gigabytes of unified memory. So these are pretty normal consumer laptop, and it will handle this type of workload pretty well, as you'll see. To give you another example, my work laptop has got 32 gigs of RAM and an Intel Core Ultra 9 with 16 cores, so pretty fast processor, very recent. And if you try to load on that a 27 billion parameter model, so one of the slightly larger ones, but nowhere near still Claude or ChatGPT, that is painfully slow. So yeah, there are some clear limitations to what you can do, but it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think the hardware limitation is probably what's going to get most people. Just to give a quick background before we jump into the difference between local versus big tech, because now OpenAI and Anthropic are big tech. Obviously, Google's already there. Those are the big three, really. But basically, Hardware seems to be the main kind of threshold where people that want to download a local model will run into and say, how much space do I actually have on my computer? How much space is it going to take up? And what is my total capacity for this local LLM on my hardware? So, what what in your opinion is the big difference between local versus the big tech, the usual ChatGPT 1 billion users across the world?
So you mean in terms of hardware or
Yeah, like
performance?
just and yeah, what's the difference there?
It's a mix of things. The largest model work in a very different way. So first of all, the underlying mechanism is very different in that the model is not on your machine, it's on somebody's servers. So they are responsible for providing digital infrastructure for running your code. So you send your prompt, it travels to somebody's servers over the internet, and which by the way means that there has to be an extent of security involved. Then it gets processed on specialized hardware in a data center, and then the responses come back. Specialized hardware is a keyword here, and data center as well. So a data center is a collection of specialized hardware. So that's why these companies are investing billions and billions on these data centers and on the energy production infrastructure that is needed to run the data center, and particularly the air conditioning to keep them cool. And when you do that, you never touch the weights in that you can't tailor the model. You're running exactly what they are providing you with, which is usually really advanced stuff, but it's not something you can tweak too much. And you and I discussed in previous lives how your chosen large language model will get used to how you work. So there will be a bit of personalization, but you are still not changing the substance, the essence of the model. And as a result of all these things, also, you can't really download a copy of those models for reasons of intellectual property, but also because it would never fit on your machine. So, because those models are so big, they are much more capable in what you can run locally. But yeah, even if you had the space, your hardware wouldn't be able to do that. There's a lot of differences, but I think the main one is going to be capability. So there are certain things that you can do with a local large language model and certain things that you simply can't, or you can try, but the results, the error ratio is going to increase significantly, or the speed is going to decrease significantly.
It's like in those commercials, results may vary. I think like one of the from speaking to other creators about this as well. I think the big thing here, there's two big ones. It's privacy, number one, right? And then number two would be obviously cost. I think a lot of creators that I work with, we have multiple subscriptions, whether it's personal use and mixed in with work. Probably in your consulting company, you guys have a contract with some AI company. I don't know who you can mention who it
Yep,
is if you
Claude.
can, Claude. And then maybe at home you have multiple subscriptions. It seems like for some people that doesn't move the needle, paying an extra $20 a month here, an extra $20 a month there. But for a lot of people, it really will move the needle. And so even though privacy seems to be like the number one, this is the factor of why a lot of people like local models. But the interesting thing about this is before we keep rolling into local LLMs, I always shout out other creators that I work with in my streams, not just for the sake of shouting them out, but for the sake of uh, a lot of the background information that I have on these topics comes from speaking with other creators, which is why I love these streams because I learn so much from everybody. It's almost like I'm getting free education here. So I appreciate it. Thanks, Andrea. So I'll mention Chris from Toxec, TOXSEC. We spoke about local LLMs, and I asked him a question about this. It's a two-part question. One is like, and you can give your opinion on this before we keep rolling. What is really the benefit for these big tech AI companies to allow people to download local models that are not a copy of what they have, because obviously they have much more strength with all the data centers and all of the compute power that they have. But then two, also in terms of the privacy question, like what's stopping them from actually like backdooring somebody who's using a local LLM and then still siphoning off that information into their data centers and collecting your data anyways, right? So it's like a Let's just say I wouldn't be surprised if your local LLM is still routing to some data center that they have and they're still collecting data on you.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons to share these models openly is to be a good player. So to be seen as a good player, a good actor with regard to AI. And like we were saying earlier, what's I think especially important is that these models are nowhere near as capable as the flagship models that all these companies run. So the vast majority of open models are not really competition for Claude, ChatGPT, or the others. So it's a nice thing to do, and it will get them good vibes from the community. But for some of them, it's also a matter of branding. We are a company that does open source or open way large language models, and the open source community. It is well known that projects Linux, open source projects have bring lots of benefit to the project itself. Obviously, the project needs to find ways to monetize. So, because if your model is downloadable by everyone, you need to find other ways to make money out of it. But there are ways, and for example, in the Linux world, one of those ways is to provide services. So, companies that sell services around Linux distributions, while the distribution itself, so downloading the operating system, is completely free. So yeah, there's lots of different business models and lots of different positions on that. On the other question, what's stopping them from sending information out? So I think some of it is the architecture. You are downloading, so it's not like you just download the model and you put it in your browser. So you need to load it into an app, which we'll talk about later, and that app will run the model for you. So using an app that's trusted and open source and as transparent as possible, in theory, guarantees that nothing shady is going on, because the model itself is just a file. It's not the sort of executable program .exe that you download on your Windows computer and run. It's a file that of a different nature. But that said, you could also have a machine that is disconnected from the internet. So I think that is what you can do. So if you're still worried that the models might be sneakily stealing your data, and I think today it's a very fair concern, to be honest. We've seen lots of rubbish happen. So yeah, just put your device in airplane mode or just disconnect from the internet, and there you go. It's guaranteed that it's working that way. So it's not sending anything out. And yeah, if you reconnect to the internet, I don't know, I can't guarantee that it's not going to do anything shady, but in principle, the way that this model works is just disconnected from the internet. And if it was connected to the internet and you go offline and you press enter, it shouldn't work, presumably. So if it still works, it means that it's running locally.
Okay. I think that kind of answers the question. Airplane mode's a good solution. So you mentioned like open source, open weight. I definitely have been hearing those terms like interchangeably, and I'm not a very technical guy. So could you give me a little background on that?
Yes, and yeah, I have to say, I am also not a very technical guy, and that's why I wanted to find information on exactly what am I downloading on my computer. And yeah, these terms are used a bit interchangeably quite often. So the idea is that if the model is open weight, the company is publishing the trained file, usually under a license that lets you download it, and in most cases fine tune it as well. So models like Llama, Quen, DeepSeek, Mistral, Google Gemma, they are in this ballpark open weight models. So you get the finished model, but you don't get the training data and you don't get any of the functions and approaches used to train the model. Whereas open source models are quite substantially different because that means that the sharing needs to go further. So you do still have the weights, but you also have the training code and enough information about the training data so that you could, at least in theory, if you had the hardware needed, reproduce a model that is substantially equivalent to what the company has let you download. And there are very few models that actually clear that bar. There's a family of models called Olmo. It's released by the Allen Institute, and that's the most prominent example. And later in the live, we will be using Gemma 4 by Google, and that is at the most permissive end of open weight. model. So it's not an open source model, but it is released under an open license, which lets you use commercially with no royalties or caps to usage. So yeah, the data for the model we'll be using is not public. So yeah, not open source. But yeah, it's I suppose the most capable models you can download on your machine tend to be open weight rather than fully open source.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, I see some live chats in there. Usually we wait until the end, but I'll read this one off just because it's what we're talking about here. Chad says weights are numbers depicting the strength of a token in relation in vector space. Super clear, right? It's funny because like when I ask you this question, a lot of and again I say I'm not technical. You're not very technical. I know Chad is a cybersecurity guy, so it's funny when all of these real technical terms come out like vector space and things like that. And you have to go and then go old school and go Google, what is vector space? Right. and, and things like that. But I kind of like the way that you broke it down there. It's made it more understandable. So I guess just moving forward here, like what are the use cases for local LLMs?
In a way, it's pretty much anything. The sky's the limit in that it's one of those, I think like any sort of chatbot, you can do whatever you want with it. And that's both an opportunity and a limitation in that if you don't have any ideas in terms of what to do with it, then what you can do with it is, but yeah, there's just no use case. So you need to make up your own use cases. What I will demo later is a summarization use case that doesn't rely on the internet for the summarization task, which is what we most often do which is one of the things that people often do with large language models. So it's what I tend to value them for the most is, as we were saying earlier, privacy and cost. So those are those very key parameters, but also offline use. So sometimes you might turn on airplane mode because you're worried about security and privacy, but in other cases you're on a train, you're in an airplane, or things like that, and you still want to use AI. And these models let you use AI wherever you are with some limitations because clearly you want to be able to connect to the internet or do live searches. But we shouldn't forget that these models have been trained on enormous amounts of data. So they can still answer questions pretty well. They won't be as precise as a model that can access the internet or reference things because of it just based on training, and that's all probabilistic, as Chad put in the chat. So there are limitations in that regard, but I think that's fantastic. I've been playing with the Gemma 4 on my phone, so I have an iPhone 17. So yeah, from last year, and it runs really fast. It's not quite as fast as Claude or ChatGPT, but it's really fast if you think it's running on a mobile device. Another thing that I think is valuable in principle, so it's not a specific use case, but a fairly high level use case, is that you can run operations, repeated operations, without worrying about costs and at scale. And I know that some companies that do. So, for example, if you've got the data analysis task, I don't know, you've got 6,000 articles and you want to tell which of these articles mention the city of, I don't know, New York, you can, and what do they say about it? So that's not just a text search, but it's slightly more intelligent. You can run those thousands of articles through your local large language model and then get all the information offline without worrying about costs and scale. So that's something that I do for work in terms of thematic coding, and it's really valuable. It's not thousands, but it works really well.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess in terms of actually running these models, I remember a little earlier in the stream, you mentioned something called Ollama, which is a funny name. What is Ollama?
Ollama is just a very simple app that you can download from your computer, and it's one of the easiest ways to run large language models locally. It's very easy to use for beginners. It's free, open source. It works on all operating systems. And essentially, it's if you want a mental model for it, it's a bit like a Docker for AI models. And all you need to use it is to run. You download it, then you open your terminal and you type in a command like Ollama pull Gemma 4, and it will just download the full model. You can also download some models through the interface itself, but there's a bit less choice. And then the terminal will just download the model on your computer. It works out whether you've got a GPU, a dedicated graphics card, or just your regular CPU. And then it prepares the model for using it. And then what it gives you is just a chat interface, as we'll see in a few minutes, that you can use just like any other leading large language model. But the other cool thing that Ollama specifically provides is that it's got an API interface that's compatible with the API format of other large language models, like the OpenAI format, which means that this is the other demo I'll show later, which means that you can interface any code that you write on your machine so that it can talk to the large language model. So you can use this both as a question and answer sort of thing, and to send it data and do something with it and send it back.
Awesome. So yeah, I think one of the cool things about these streams now is luckily we have share screens, which is fun. Not too long ago, that wasn't an option. So rather than just talking about it, let's do it. Let's see what it looks like. I know you have a couple demos lined up, so let's see the first one. Let's see what you got for us, Andrea.
Great. So hopefully the screen sharing now will work. So there we go. You should be able to see my screen now. On the left hand side, you've got Perplexity. This is Perplexity app. It's downloaded on my MacBook, but you can also use it online, obviously. And this one, you can see from the llama, you can probably tell that it's Ollama. And what I'll do now is that I will show you how the speed compares between the two. So I'm originally from Italy. I'll put a question about Italy there. So what's the best holiday destination in Italy? So we'll run it from both Ollama and Perplexity. So Ollama, as you can see here, is using the Gemma 4 model. It's a 4 billion parameter model. So it's one of the smaller ones you can download on your machine. So I'll press this first and very quickly press Perplexity 2. So I think it's pretty obvious that Perplexity is quicker. We've already got the answer, whereas Gemma 4 is currently reasoning. So let's give it a moment. But as you can see, it thought about how to structure the response, what a potential answer, and there you go. It thought for about 19 seconds, or about 20, and now it's outputting the response. If we look at the responses as well, it's interesting. So, as an Italian, I can tell you what I think about the different responses. So, the top pick is the Amalfico. So, personally, I disagree with that. And if it was me, I would recommend you visit Tuscany or Rome. And yeah, it doesn't look like Perplexity has recommended Rome at all. It did recommend Tuscany. Whereas Gemma 4, as you can see, it's still outputting. But let's also appreciate that Gemma 4 here is a reasoning model. So while Perplexity gave us this very nice response quickly, Gemma 4 presented a much deeper response. It recommended Rome and Tuscany, which personally I agree more with, but it also, recommended the Amalfi Coast for beaches, scenery, and relaxation. Then the rest is more responses. It provided a pretty nice summary at the end and some follow up questions. So, as you can see, this is pretty similar to what you could do online. The Ollama response using Gemma 4, and you can pick lots of different models. So, this is just a few models that it previews. You can run some of them in the cloud if you like, but that kind of defeats the point of it, if you ask me. And I have also downloaded Quen 9 billion model. This is slightly slower, but pretty good. And as I was saying earlier, anything bigger than that is not going to run on my device. Leo, any immediate reaction after seeing the demo?
Yeah, I will say, first of all, I've heard really good things about Gemma 4. I think just to mention the speed difference, it almost seems inconsequential. Obviously, it was just a tad slower, but I don't really see how that would really affect anybody on a just any real use case. I think it's pretty incredible that this is not using the internet. This is just sitting on your laptop. I see you mentioned in the notes the model file is about 7.5 gigabytes. And most people these days with their computers, they have 7.5 gigabytes of photos that they could probably delete from 10 years ago. Like clearing up a little bit of space on your computer to do something like this is pretty easy. It seems. I think it's incredible.
Yeah, and on my work laptop, I've downloaded a larger 27 billion parameter model that's not quite, but almost 20 gigabytes. But when you've got 1,000 gigabytes, it's pretty inconsequential. Yeah, there's more than enough room to run it.
It's awesome. It's really cool.
Yeah, and I think
So
Chad in the chat is highlighting that clearly the speed depends on the device. And yeah, this is as I was saying earlier, an M4 MacBook Air, just for everybody's awareness as a reminder if you joined a bit later. And I don't have a dedicated graphics card, nor do I have one on my work device. But yeah, larger models can run at almost, well, a pretty similar speed to what you'd expect from Claude or ChatGPT if you have a dedicated, graphics card.
this is really cool. So I guess now we have another demo with this, which is a Python script summarizing a Wikipedia article. And I guess the difference, I guess, what that we're going to show with this next demo is, so this was just like a chat, right? You just asked a question about Italy, pretty simple stuff, but like, how would this apply to real work?
That's right. Yeah, this is what I'll show you now is definitely something closer to what you do in a real work situation or something that companies are already doing, by the way, instead of paying companies like Anthropic or OpenAI to run the calculations for them at scale. So let me change my window. I think, you should be able to see my screen now.
Yeah.
So a quick note on what you've seen here on screen. I'm running this in Visual Studio Code, which is one of the most popular code editors. It's built on an open source code base maintained by Microsoft. And this polished version you can see here on screen is made available by Microsoft for free. So this is my choice of large language model, of code editor. Up here, you can see this integration with Claude Code if you wanted it. So yeah, it's a pretty advanced code editor. The mo- I think, this is definitely a more interesting use for a large language model because we're using it through the API functionality. So we are feeding some data to the large language model on the device. We are getting structured output back and we're building it into a workflow. So what I'll show you now is just one step. So summarizing one article, but this could easily be turned into a loop going through hundreds or thousands of articles. The script that I'll show you does three main things. The first one is downloading the text from a Wikipedia page on the topic of pasta, because I wanted to keep this as uncontroversial as possible. Then it sends text from this article to my local Gemma model with a request to summarize it, which is a simple AI prompt. And this could be any URL or any prompt or request. So this is just an example that I picked just to show you. It's probably too small to see, but let me see if I can't zoom in from here. But yeah, down here, it's just the URL of the Wikipedia page on pasta. And if we scroll down a little bit, the prompt is summarize the following news article in 4 to 6 sentences, stick to the facts in the article and do not editorialize. And then there's the body of the article. So it's pretty straightforward. Most of the text in here is just using the Wikipedia API. For full transparency, this was beautifully written by Claude. I didn't write a single line of this code, which was also a very nice experience. So I'll press play up here. And as you can see, this is running. So fetching the text, it says article was long, truncated to 12,000 characters. This is not something that it does because it wants to. I've instructed it to do so to keep the exercise manageable. So it extracted 12,000 characters and then sending to Ollama model Gemma for E4B, which is the model that we're using. We give it a few more seconds and you will see that the summary of the article is going to start streaming out in the terminal as it's being generated. There it is. And it's a very, very sensible summary of what pasta is. You don't have to read it. I won't spend time reading it, but as you can see, as you might be able to see, the total wall time is 42 seconds, time to first token 35 seconds, and 25 tokens per second. So this is pretty reasonable. And I have to say, this is lower than it usually runs on my device, probably because I've got lots of windows open, a second screen on. Usually in 20 seconds, it will give me the full answer. And probably, as Chad was saying again, with more advanced hardware or more recent processors, it would be even better. So yeah, I think this is cool because it's essentially a small piece of automation that processes content with an LLM, but without subscribing to Claude, ChatGPT, or whatever else. There's no API key involved. I didn't send data to a third party. And if I wanted to run this on 1,000 articles overnight, the only constraint is how long my laptop takes, and of course whether the owner of the articles allows this. So yeah, never forget copyright issues. My original idea for this was to summarize a news article, and then I thought against it because newspapers and magazines don't seem to like that.
Yeah, interesting. The more I look at this now, and obviously I've spoken about local models with other creators, but um, this almost seems like this at some point might put an end to at least the big tech LLM model of making money. Because now even older computers, like I have a computer from 2019. It's a MacBook Pro. I would have no issues doing this. I actually just recently cleared up a bunch of uh, storage space on my computer. I could easily do this. Um, and I think obviously there's some use cases here that we're not even touching on, which is not necessarily even summarizing an article or just asking a regular chat question. But like for example, like the way I run my Substack, I could probably do the whole thing on a local model. Um, so I guess the question is how intricate, how technical, how advanced is your use case? And then that's probably where the question comes into play and where you might actually say, okay, a local model is not enough for me. But probably for I don't know what the percentage of people, probably 90% of people could do this and basically have the same experience as if they're paying $20 a month for Claude or for ChatGPT and have the same results and probably just have to wait an extra 10-20 seconds depending on what type of computer you have. It's pretty incredible. Um, so I guess like my question to you, like, what's really the benefits here? Is there any is there a catch to this whole thing?
No, I think there really isn't. There are only advantages. And actually, aside from functionality and capability, so as we were saying earlier, there are some things that you can't really do. So things like summarization, classification, extraction tasks, conversational use, absolutely fine to run it with this. Anything that requires advanced reasoning, long context specifically, or when you need broad knowledge, up to date information, those things you can't really do with this model. I think especially up-to-date information. Now all models have a live search function. Didn't used to be the case, maybe just a year ago. But now all models can browse the internet and get you updated information. So yeah, for these models, the cutoff date for the knowledge will be whatever it is, to be honest. But unless you're using them for something that is particularly tied to being up to date, then in most cases, you're fine. And the biggest advantage, I think, when you're using these things professionally or at scale is that there is no lock in with the vendor, and the vendor can't change anything for you because when you've downloaded the file, it's on your computer. Nobody can take it away. Nobody can change it. It's like it was yours. Whereas I'm sure many people will remember all the complaints that there were when ChatGPT released. I think it was GPT-5 that changed the personality of the chatbot, and so people were really attached to the previous one, and they really complain like, "This is yours, and nobody can mess with it." And from a professional perspective, there's also something around reproducibility. So it is always the same model. So the fact that nobody can change it also enables you to use the exact same conditions every time you run it.
Interesting. So I guess before we wrap up, then just put a summary to this now. People can actually start. Maybe just a couple chats here. Chad says, my favorite thing about local models is that it doesn't feel like a waste just messing around and seeing what it can do. So far, it seems to be true. This is the first time I'm actually seeing a demo of somebody using it live. I've seen some YouTube videos on it, but I think we're bringing a new perspective into this of actually showing people how to start. And as we wrap up, we'll really just mention that again. Let's see here. This goes back a little bit into what we were talking about earlier. But Ed Tucker says extra subscriptions are useful, but scatter my projects. I think there's some truth to that. I think also just what I've noticed, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it somewhat relates to the whole topic because obviously the main two reasons for doing this are number one, privacy, number two would be cost. But it seems like at least the other creators that I work with, which I guess some people would call power users, have multiple subscriptions. Whereas, and I've touched on this in other streams as well. I just think it's maybe an important point. Maybe the data's out there. I haven't looked at it. I probably should. The data that is out there, for example, is, for example, on OpenAI's platform, 90% of people are using the free version. 10% are subscribed, whether it's $20 a month, whatever it might be. And I guess the question that came up when I first started discussing local models with other creators, now with Andrea, is like what percentage of that 10% has multiple subscriptions? And at least for me, it seems like anecdotally, the other creators that I work with, we all have multiple subscriptions, whether it's us personally paying for them monthly, or we have one that we use personally. And then in our workspace, we have another one that's paid for in the contract by the company that we worked for. And obviously, you have all these big companies now trying to build these super apps to lock you in. And it really seems, especially after seeing this demo, that lock in might be gone soon. It's really interesting to see. And again, for the 90% of people that are using ChatGPT, for example, on free, right? Now your only concern is privacy. Here's the answer. So I guess to wrap it up, put a bow and a ribbon on it, like we went through the demos, Ollama, right? So like how do people start?
Yeah, it is generally really easy, and I personally find it quite fun. So, yeah, you go to ollama.com, you literally just download it. Then you either download one of the models through the interface, so that's very easy to do, or you open the terminal and you run a command. Let me just put it in the chat so that you can visually see how easy it is. So this is the command you put in the terminal. Ollama pull, which basically just means Ollama download. Gemma 4 E4B. So Gemma 4 is the model, the latest Gemma model. E4B is the 4 billion parameter version of that model. You can put lots of different types of model. You can ask Perplexity which is the best one based on my hardware, and it will usually give you pretty good responses. So if you tell it, I've got this processor, this amount of RAM, this graphics card, which models can I realistically run on my machine, it will give you tips. But that after you put in that command, the terminal will just download the file, validate it, and make sure that it's all as it should be. Then it will load it up into itself, into Ollama, and then you can start chatting to it, or you can write a bit of code and yeah, speak to it. Leo, if we want to, we can also share the code that I put together and demoed with the audience, so we can put it together and share it via Substack, so that people can see just how easy it is. Download it. For that code to work, you would have to install Python on your computer. But again, just go to the Python website and press download. It is as simple as that. And then run the code. It is really easy. There is a big opportunity. And I think companies who want to be independent of the big tech players are generally engaging with all of these local large language models.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think that would be a good idea to do, Andrea, sorry. I know that when we do these streams, usually you post an article, you link the video. So you could definitely feel free to include that code. I think that would be very valuable. So I guess we can wrap it up here. Before we do, I'm just going to put the YouTube channel in the chat as usual. For those of you that have stuck around this long, whether you're watching later on YouTube or you're with us in the live now, subscribe on YouTube. You can copy paste that link, or you can go to YouTube and search Exploring ChatGPT Live. You'll find streams there, me and Andrea, other creators, clips. And yeah, really appreciate if you subscribe. Subscribe to Andrea as well on Substack, Andrea Chiarelli. And yeah, I guess we can wrap it up there. I think this was a really good stream. I really enjoyed it. Really like the demos. And yeah, Andrea, anything else to add before we wrap up here?
No, nothing else besides saying thank you for having me here again, Leo. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me. All right, guys, see you in the next one. Enjoy the rest of your day.